Sarah, what do we know about Iribe's reasons for leaving, and do they differ from that of the other founders?
Well, it's sort of, you're seeing this trend right now, right? All these companies were convinced to join Facebook in part because Facebook said that they could remain a little bit independent, sort of like the same independent company they always were, but within Facebook, with all of these resources to grow faster. It looks like that kind of promise is eroding a bit. Iribe said that he needs time off because he's been in the game for 20 years and he needs a break. Whether that's the real reason, I'm sure we'll find out soon, but it's just a part of this larger trend of Facebook taking a little bit more control over the future of Facebook, which is, as we have spoken about on the show, the future of Facebook is going to be more diversified than Facebook itself and the newsfeed. It's going to be dependent on these other properties to bring money in that's more diversified, and certainly VR is one of those longest term bets.
Now, Iribe's departure is certainly not surprising. I mean, you've reported, Sarah, on tension between the Oculus founders and Facebook that goes way back. But him leaving in the context of all of these other founders leaving. David, Sarah and I heard Kevin Systrom speak at the Wired conference last week, and he was very diplomatic. He didn't sell Mark Zuckerberg down the river. But the way in which these departures have happened does not look good. How bad is this, David, for Facebook?
Well, there's no question it does not look good, but you got to remember, all these people got a gigantic payday quite some time ago, and, you know, they are now in a company that they have to justify to all their friends why they're staying with. I mean, that's the reality of working at Facebook today. Facebook is increasingly perceived as a negative in society among the sort of sophisticated circles that these kind of people circulate in. And also, if you don't really have much power to do anything about the significant central problems that the company is facing, you're working in a more peripheral part of it like Oculus or even WhatsApp, which is not very far off the center, I acknowledge. But, you know, you might just feel you just don't have the power to do anything about it. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't listen to you. Therefore, just clear out. Plus, yes, of course they're tired.
Is that the case, though, Sarah? Because, you know, we had that rebuttal from Facebook's David Marcus, who said that Mark Zuckerberg goes to extraordinary lengths to protect founders. What are you hearing?
Well, I think he does protect founders as long as they're performing to his expectations. And I think in the case of Oculus, you know, Facebook was a little disappointed about how fast that was moving. A couple years ago, Brendan Iribe stepped down from his job as CEO to leave room for Hugo Barra, the Xiaomi executive, to come take over the whole VR initiative. And so Barra has really been driving that. And in the couple years that he's been in charge, they've released a few new devices that bring VR into a more mass market realm. There was the Oculus Quest and the cheaper one that came out earlier this year that people can buy for their homes. I mean, this is something that the part of it that Brendan was working on, this sort of high quality PC tethered Oculus, will be a little bit more of a narrow market if you think about Zuckerberg's vision of eventually getting 1 billion people using virtual reality.
David, you just published a post on techonomy.com where the first line is, never before has one company's failure had such a devastating impact on the world. That is a devastating opening line, if you will. This is a company that is now working on its election response in multiple countries, not with just the U.S. midterms coming up, but also elections happening in Brazil. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's not the only very strongly negative line in that story, sadly, which is called Facing Facebook's Failure. I really was, unfortunately, I felt forced as someone who's been covering this company closely for 12 years. I wrote a book called The Facebook Effect about it, which was a generally positive portrayal. And I still believe the company has enormous positive potential and does a lot of good in the world. But it is doing some enormously negative things in the world that I don't think the company is acknowledging or fully reckoning with. and has actually, to some extent, sought to suppress and cover up. And the story actually documents specific cases where they have dissembled, where they have refused to react after being presented with unequivocal evidence, particularly in cases like genocide in Sri Lanka and Myanmar, all kinds of hate speech incidents that they've done a very poor job responding to, and never really taken a systemic look at their system and asked, why is this happening? And my fundamental critique in the article is that they prioritize growth over governance. And we now have a global system which empowers anyone, including the most evil, dishonest people, whether they're political leaders or criminals or whomever, and it does not have governance or real tools to allow the malfeasance that takes place on this system to be regulated and contained. And that is causing enormous difficulty in the world. And it worries me tremendously.
Walk us through what's happening in Brazil right now, days away from a presidential runoff election where WhatsApp has been overrun by fake news and conspiracy theories, and you have a candidate who didn't have a lot of public campaign funding, managed to somehow run an incredibly successful campaign exploiting social media.
Well, Facebook would like you to think just of the good that the platform has allowed to proliferate, but there's also the same tool can be used for viral misinformation and spam and the kind of activity that's gone on WhatsApp. And Facebook was able to take down a lot of spam accounts on Friday, and that was like their response to the fact that there was just this proliferation of misinformation that's in some cases led to violence around Brazil's first vote. There'll be a follow-up vote on October 28th. But this is messy, and as many of Facebook's problems are, because it's not just random bad actors in the community stirring up drama. It's not even a foreign actor. It's people from within Bolsonaro's campaign. His son was kicked off of WhatsApp and then later restored. And Facebook's dealing with that at the same time as it's trying to roll out this war room where it's trying to convince the public that it will be prepared for the not just the Brazil runoff election, but the U.S. midterms coming up very soon. And the problem in Brazil in particular is that WhatsApp is an encrypted app. So the messages that people send to each other, Facebook can't really see. They're using their machine learning, AI training, some of the signals they're getting from Facebook to try to figure out where the spam is and where it's coming from. And then all they can do is get rid of the account. They can't necessarily track what's being sent to who or how often it's being sent. And that is a very hard problem to solve.
David, Sarah and I both went into this election interference war room that Facebook has now set up, where they have teams of people from different teams across the company who can make quick decisions if something happens. They're tracking the elections in Brazil. They're tracking the elections in the United States. The point has been made that Facebook can't do everything. At a certain point, it's going to be up to users to decide if they see a post, whether it looks false or not. Is it too much to expect Facebook to be able to do apparently what we're expecting Facebook to do?
Well, certainly I think no intelligent observer could expect them to keep all unpleasant and unproductive messages off their system. What we need is far better means to address the problems when they are identified. I think the war room is a great idea. It should have really been begun probably 4 years ago. But you look at a situation like what happened in Brazil with Bolsonaro, his son getting kicked off WhatsApp, or in Myanmar, where the general who runs the country got kicked off Facebook, but they only kicked him off after the UN recommended that he be prosecuted by the International Criminal Court. That's how much of a signal they required. They actually had plenty of information, if they chose to look at it, to know that the generals who run Myanmar were encouraging a genocide against the Rohingya Muslim minority. So the problem is, this is a country that's in 133 languages in 190 countries, and the goal they had was to get there. And now they're there, and they don't really know what to do to prevent it from having dramatically negative political consequences. And part of the problem is there are a certain kind of politicians that are popping up in Turkey, in Hungary, in Myanmar, in plenty of places where they're, Brazil, in Italy, where they don't really want to follow the rules. They want power at all costs, and they will do whatever they have to do. And Facebook is a system that is easy to cheat inside, and Facebook does not yet have the tools to prevent that cheating. It's something that we at Techonomy have made such a priority. We have a session at our conference in 3 weeks with two of the sources in this story, including Sanjana Hatatua, who's a Sri Lankan human rights activist who tells the most shocking stories in that article that I published today. It is shocking how much Facebook has allowed to happen. It is unacceptable. They can't solve everything. They can't ever be perfect, but it's disastrous.
Sarah, the other thing that's fascinating is simply the size of WhatsApp in Brazil rivals the size of Facebook. I mean, does that happen anywhere else?
It's very common in countries outside the US for WhatsApp to be so much more popular than Facebook. And so that's one of the problems here. When Facebook comes out and says, we are going to solve this problem, we are administering our machine learning algorithms, we're checking what's trending, we're figuring out who's saying what, and we're figuring out if there are any fake accounts and bots and pages, and we'll purge them. That stuff doesn't necessarily apply to the main tool that people are using in many of these countries.